We were trained to hunt anything that moved. But in those mountains, something was hunting us back. Hey everyone, before we dive into tonight's story, if you enjoy these deep dives into the unexplained and the terrifying, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. It really helps the channel grow. Now, let's begin. My name is Marcus Webb, and I need to tell you what happened in the Cascade Mountains in October 2023. Not because I want to relive it, not because anyone will believe me, but because 3 good men disappeared up there, and the official report is a lie. I was a staff sergeant in the Marine Corps, leading a specialized reconnaissance unit. We weren't your standard infantry. Our team was trained for wilderness operations, tracking, surveillance, survival in the most hostile terrain imaginable. We'd operated in the Hindu Kush, the jungles of Southeast Asia, the frozen wastes of Alaska. We were good, the best, actually, but nothing prepared us for what waited in those mountains. It started with a phone call to our CO at Camp Pendleton. A series of hikers had gone missing in a remote section of the North Cascades, near the Canadian border. Local search and rescue had found remains, torn apart, scattered across half a mile of dense forest. The authorities were calling it a bear attack, but there were inconsistencies, things that didn't add up. The FBI wanted boots on the ground, professionals who could navigate that terrain and determine if there was a human threat, poachers maybe, or something worse, a serial killer using the wilderness as his hunting ground. That's where we came in. Our team consisted of 5 Marines, myself, Corporal Danny Reeves, our communications specialist, Lance Corporal James Fisher, demolitions and weapons, Private First Class Antonio Garcia, our tracker and survival expert, and Private Kyle Hendricks, the youngest, barely 22, but sharp as they come. We flew into a small airstrip in northern Washington on October 15. The sky was the color of old bruises, and a fine mist clung to everything like cobwebs. A park ranger named Sarah Voss met us at the landing strip. She was in her late 40s, weathered and lean with the kind of eyes that had seen too much and trusted too little. She asked, "Are you the military consultants?" sizing us up as we unloaded our gear. "Yes, ma'am," I replied, extending my hand. "Staff Sergeant Webb, this is my team." She shook my hand briefly, her grip cold and firm. "Sarah Voss. I've been a ranger in these mountains for 23 years. I've seen bear attacks, cougar kills, cliff falls, hypothermia deaths. What we found out there," she paused, her jaw tightening, "that wasn't any animal I know." "Can you show us the site?" I asked. "It's a 6-hour hike from the nearest trail access. We'll need to leave at dawn." She glanced at the sky, which was already darkening, despite it being only 4 p.m. "You don't want to be in those woods after dark." "Why's that?" Fish asked. Sarah turned to him, and for a moment something flickered in her eyes. Not fear exactly, but recognition of something she couldn't name. "Because that's when they move." "They?" I pressed. She didn't answer, just turned and walked back to her truck. We started our hike at 5:30 a.m., when the forest was still wrapped in darkness and morning mist. Our headlamps cut narrow tunnels through the gloom, illuminating the twisted roots and moss-covered stones that made up the trail. Everything was wet, the kind of wet that seeps into your bones and never leaves. The forest felt wrong from the start. I'd been in forests all over the world, and they all have their own rhythm. Bird calls at dawn, the rustle of small mammals, insects buzzing, branches creaking in the wind. This forest had none of that. The silence was oppressive, broken only by our footsteps and the occasional drip of water from the canopy above. "Anyone else notice there's no birds?" Garcia whispered, about 2 hours into the hike. He was right. Not a single bird call.
Not even the caw of a crow or the tap of a woodpecker. "Probably just the season," Hendricks offered, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah, who was leading us up a steep incline, stopped and turned. "The birds left 3 weeks ago. All of them. All at once." She pointed to a massive Douglas fir to our left. "See that tree? Usually there'd be a pair of owls nested there this time of year. Been there for 5 years running. Gone now. Animals have instincts. Maybe they sense something. A coming storm or a predator," Sarah finished. "A predator big enough to scare off every living thing in a 20-mile radius." We continued in silence after that. Around noon, we reached the first site. Sarah had marked it with orange tape tied to nearby trees. The area had been photographed and partially processed by the local sheriff's department, but they'd left most of it untouched once they realized how far above their pay grade this was. The scene was... I don't have adequate words for it. Imagine a human body, a young man, probably in his 20s, torn apart with such force that pieces of him were scattered in a radius of about 40 yards. But it wasn't the violence that unsettled me most. It was the precision. The ribcage was cracked open like someone peeling a lobster. The limbs were separated at the joints, not ripped or sawed, but pulled apart with enough force to dislocate and tear through ligament and muscle. Fish knelt by what remained of the torso, examining it with clinical detachment. He'd seen combat, seen bodies torn by explosives and gunfire. "This wasn't a bear," he said quietly. "Bears maul, they bite and slash. This is something else." Garcia was studying the ground, moving in a slow circle around the site. He was the best tracker I ever worked with, able to read a trail like other people read books. After several minutes, he stood and walked back to us, his face pale. "Sergeant, you need to see this." He led me about 20 feet from the main site to a patch of soft earth near a rotting log. There, pressed into the mud, was a print. It was roughly the shape of a human hand, but elongated, the fingers at least 7 inches long, each tipped with what looked like a claw mark. The palm was narrow, almost skeletal. "What the hell is that?" Hendricks breathed. "I don't know," Garcia admitted. "It's not any animal I've tracked. The stride pattern is wrong, too. Whatever made this was moving on all fours, but the gait is off, like it's not used to walking that way." "How fresh?" I asked. 2 days, maybe 3. I took photographs from multiple angles, then called the team together. "All right, listen up. I don't know what we're dealing with here, but we proceed with tactical awareness. Weapons ready, eyes open. We do not split up under any circumstances. Clear?" A chorus of "Yes, sir, Sergeant," answered me. Sarah led us deeper into the forest, toward the second site. The terrain grew more difficult. Steep ravines, fallen trees, thick underbrush that clawed at our gear. The mist never lifted. If anything, it grew thicker, reducing visibility to maybe 30 feet in any direction. That's when we found the bones. They were hanging from the trees. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, that the white objects dangling from the lower branches were some kind of fungus or dead branches. But as we got closer, the truth became horrifically clear. Dozens of bones, femurs, ribs, skulls, were suspended from the branches by what looked like dried sinew. They formed a rough perimeter around a clearing, swaying gently in the breeze we couldn't feel. "Jesus Christ," Reeves whispered. "This is territorial marking," Garcia said, his voice tight. "Predators do this sometimes. Wolves, big cats. They mark their territory to warn others away." "Wolves don't hang bones from trees," Fish countered. "No," Garcia agreed. "They don't." Sarah was staring at the bone perimeter with an expression I couldn't quite read. "The old-timers in town have stories about these mountains. My grandfather told me once, when I was little, he said the native tribes that used to live here had a word for something that lived in the deep forest. Chinu, I think. Or maybe that was a different tribe's word. He said it was a person who had been turned into something else, something that was always hungry. "With respect, ma'am," I said, carefully, "we're not here to chase folklore." "Neither am I, Sergeant," she replied, meeting my eyes. "I'm just telling you what the people who knew these mountains best believed." We set up a temporary camp in the clearing, despite the bone perimeter. It was the most defensible position we'd found, with good sight lines and our backs to a steep rock face. I established a watch rotation, 2 on, 3 off, and we prepared a cold camp. No fire. We couldn't risk drawing attention. As darkness fell, the forest changed. The oppressive silence gave way to sounds, but not natural sounds. There was a clicking, almost rhythmic, like someone tapping sticks together in a pattern. It came from different directions, never the same place twice. And under that, a softer sound. Breathing. Heavy, wet breathing, like someone with fluid in their lungs. "You hearing that, Sergeant?" Hendricks asked, his rifle trained on the tree line. "Copy that. Stay alert." The clicking grew louder, more frequent. And then we heard the voice. It started as a low moan, almost human, but not quite. Then it formed words, or what sounded like words. The cadence was wrong. The vowels stretched too long, the consonants clicking and wet. "Help me. Help me. Help me." It was coming from just beyond the edge of our visibility, somewhere in the mist-shrouded trees. "That's the third victim," Sarah whispered. "Michael Chen, 26. He was calling for help for 3 days before we found what was left of him." "That's not possible," Fish said. "The attack was a week ago. No one survives that kind of trauma." "I know," Sarah replied. The voice called again, closer now. "Help. Please. It hurts." "It's mimicking," Garcia realized. Like a parrot or a minor bird. It heard the victim's cries, and now He was cut off by a sound that made my blood freeze. A shriek. High-pitched, inhuman. Like metal, scraping metal mixed with the scream of a rabbit being killed. It echoed through the forest, seeming to come from everywhere at once. And then silence.
None of us slept that night. At 3:47 a.m., by my watch, Hendricks grabbed my arm and pointed into the mist. "Movement. 11 o'clock. 30 meters." I raised my night vision scope and scanned the tree line. At first I saw nothing. Then a shape resolved itself from the darkness. Pale, impossibly thin, moving between the trees with a fluid, wrong gait. It was roughly human-shaped, but the proportions were all wrong. The arms were too long, hanging past where knees should be. The legs bent backward at the joints, like a dog's hind legs. And the head, God, the head was too large, bulbous, with a face that was almost human but stretched and distorted. It stopped at the edge of the clearing, maybe 20 feet from our position. In my night vision I could see its eyes, large, reflective, with vertical pupils. It tilted its head, studying us with an intelligence that was deeply, fundamentally wrong. "Nobody move," I breathed. The creature, I didn't know what else to call it, opened its mouth, and that's when I saw the teeth. Rows of them, thin and needle-like, designed for gripping and tearing. When it spoke, its voice was a perfect imitation of Sarah's earlier warning. "You don't want to be in these woods after dark." Then it smiled. The expression was so grotesquely wrong on that inhuman face that I felt my finger tighten on my trigger. But before I could fire, it dropped to all fours and vanished into the mist with a speed that shouldn't have been possible. "What the F was that?" Hendricks gasped. "Contact rear," Garcia shouted. I spun. 3 more of them were emerging from different positions around our camp, moving in that same disturbing crawl. They were coordinating, hunting as a pack. "Open fire!" I ordered. The night exploded with muzzle flashes and the crack of rifle fire.
I saw my rounds hit the nearest creature's center mass, saw it stumble, saw the dark spray of what might have been blood, but it didn't go down. Instead, it shrieked that scraping metal scream and rushed forward with terrifying speed. Fish had his shotgun up, firing buckshot into the charging creature. At that range, with that weapon, he should have blown it in half. Instead, it jerked backward, shrieked again, and retreated into the darkness. The other two creatures circled us, staying just out of effective range, making that clicking sound, communicating, planning. "Sergeant, they're testing us," Reeves said, his voice shaking. "They're learning our weapons." He was right. They'd baited us into revealing our firepower, our positions, our capabilities. These things weren't just predators. They were intelligent. "Pack it up," I ordered. "We're moving, now." "It's still dark," Sarah protested. "We'll never make it down the mountain in the dark." "We're not going down. We're going deeper. If these things have a nest, a den, whatever, we find it and we burn it out." "That's insane," she said flatly. "Those people who went missing, they were running away. That's why the creatures caught them in the open, vulnerable. We're going to do the opposite. We're going on the offensive." It was a gamble, maybe a stupid one. But I'd seen the way those things moved, the way they'd coordinated their attack. If we tried to retreat, they'd pick us off one by one in the dark. Our only chance was to push forward, to become the hunters instead of the hunted. We moved out at 4 a.m., using our night vision and GPS to navigate the treacherous terrain. The creatures followed us. We could hear them in the darkness, clicking and calling to each other. Sometimes they'd mimic one of our voices. I heard my own voice saying "all clear" from the darkness behind us. Heard Hendrix's voice calling for help from a direction he wasn't in. As dawn broke, the forest became even more oppressive. The mist was so thick now that we were moving through what felt like a solid wall of gray. Sarah led us up a steep incline, using what she said was an old native trail that hadn't been maintained in decades. That's when Garcia found the cave. It was hidden behind a curtain of hanging moss and fallen timber, a dark mouth in the hillside about 8 feet high and maybe 5 feet wide. The smell coming from it was indescribable, rot and copper and something else, something chemical and wrong. "This is it," Garcia said. "This is their den." We could see bones at the entrance, fresh ones, and something else, pieces of clothing, backpacks, a torn hiking boot with the foot still inside. Fish pulled out his flashlight and shined it into the darkness. The beam didn't penetrate far, but what we could see made my stomach turn. The walls of the cave were covered in marks, scratches, symbols, patterns, and bones. So many bones, embedded in the rock like some kind of grotesque art installation. "I'm going in," I said. "Sergeant, that's—" "Someone has to. We need to know what we're dealing with." I checked my rifle, adjusted my headlamp. "Fish, you're with me. The rest of you, defensive perimeter. Anything comes out of those trees, you light it up." Fish and I entered the cave.
The passage sloped downward, deeper into the mountain. The walls were slick with moisture and something else, a clear, viscous fluid that smelled like ammonia. Our lights cast wild shadows on the walls, making the scratched patterns seem to move and writhe. About 50 feet in, the passage opened into a larger chamber, and that's where we found them. There were 7 of the creatures clustered together in the center of the chamber in what looked like sleep? Hibernation? They were piled on top of each other, their pale bodies intertwined, their chests rising and falling in slow, synchronized breaths. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the person. She was alive, barely, bound to the wall with that same dried sinew we'd seen holding the bones in the trees. Her eyes were open but vacant, staring at nothing. Her abdomen had been opened, not violently but surgically, and I could see things moving inside her. Larvae, maybe, or eggs. Something was gestating inside her. Fish made a sound, a small, choked gasp, and one of the creature's eyes snapped open. "Run!
I whispered. We ran. The shrieking started immediately, echoing through the cave and out into the forest beyond. We burst out of the cave entrance, and I screamed, "Fall back! Fall back!" to the team. They came pouring out of the cave behind us, not 7, but dozens. The cave must have gone deeper than we'd seen, must have connected to other chambers, other nests. They moved like a pale wave, scrambling over each other in their frenzy to reach us. We ran down the mountain, firing behind us, trying to slow them down. I saw Hendricks get hit by one of them. It leapt from a tree branch above, landing on his shoulders and sinking those needle teeth into his neck. He went down screaming, and 3 more creatures were on him before we could react. "Keep moving!" I shouted, dragging Reeves forward as he tried to turn back for Hendricks. Garcia was ahead, leading us down a steep ravine when his foot caught on a root. He tumbled forward, hit the ground hard, and before he could get up, they were on him. I saw him draw his sidearm, saw him fire 3 shots into the creature that was tearing at his chest. Then he looked at me, and I saw acceptance in his eyes. "Go! Get out! Tell them!" I never heard what he wanted us to tell them. His words were cut off by that awful shrieking. It was just me, Fish, Reeves, and Sarah now. We crashed through the forest, our lungs burning, our legs screaming. Behind us, the creatures howled and clicked, their calls echoing through the trees. We reached a cliff edge, a sheer drop of at least 60 feet into a rocky stream below. A dead end. "There," Sarah pointed, to a narrow ledge that ran along the cliff face. "We can traverse to that tree line." It was barely 18 inches wide, crumbling rock over a lethal drop, but we had no choice. Sarah went first, moving quickly despite her age. Reeves followed, then Fish. I was bringing up the rear when the first creature came into view, skidding to a stop at the cliff edge. It looked at me with those wrong, intelligent eyes, and then it smiled again. "Jump," it said, in my voice. "Jump, Sergeant." More of them appeared, 6, then 10, then too many to count. They lined the cliff edge, watching us with an unnerving patience. "Sergeant, move!" Fish called from ahead. I started traversing the ledge, my back pressed against the rock, not daring to look down. I was halfway across when I heard the sound of rock cracking. The ledge beneath Reeves was giving way. "Reeves, move!" I shouted. He lunged forward just as the section of ledge crumbled away. Sarah grabbed his arm, hauling him to more stable ground. But the collapse had created a gap, maybe 4 feet wide, between them and us. "You have to jump it," Sarah called. Fish went first, getting a running start and leaping across the gap. He made it, stumbling forward into Reeves' arms. I prepared to follow, but then I felt something grab my ankle. I looked down. One of them had climbed down the cliff face and was hanging there, upside down, its elongated fingers wrapped around my leg. It grinned up at me with those needle teeth. I kicked hard, catching it in the face. It shrieked but held on. More of them started climbing down, moving on the vertical surface as easily on flat ground. "Sergeant!" Fish screamed. I could see the gap ahead, could see my team on the other side, could see more creatures flooding onto the ledge behind them. We were trapped. They were all going to die if they waited for me. "Go!" I shouted. "That's an order. Get to the extraction point. Tell them what we found." "We're not leaving you!" Reeves yelled back. "You don't have a choice! Go! Now!" The creature on my leg was pulling, trying to drag me off the ledge. I fired my rifle straight down, the muzzle flash blinding in the dim light. The creature's head exploded and it fell away, but 2 more were already climbing up to take its place. I watched my team disappear into the forest, Sarah leading them. Good, they might make it. I turned to face the creatures that were now surrounding me on the narrow ledge. I had maybe half a magazine left. Not enough. "Come on then," I said. They came.
The official report states that Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb died in a training accident during a wilderness survival exercise in the North Cascades on October 18, 2023. It states that the rest of his unit successfully completed their mission parameters and reported no unusual findings. But I'm telling you this story now, aren't I? I woke up in a hospital in Seattle 3 days later. They told me search and rescue had found me at the base of a cliff barely alive. Multiple fractures, severe blood loss, hypothermia. I shouldn't have survived the fall, they said. It was a miracle. But I didn't fall. I remember being pulled off that ledge. I remember those creatures dragging me back through the forest. I remember being brought to that cave, being bound to the wall like the woman I'd seen, feeling their hands, if you can call them hands, examining me, deciding. And then I remembered Sarah Voss being there, in the cave, speaking to them in a language I didn't understand. I remember her cutting me free. I remember her telling me, in a voice filled with infinite sadness, "You saw too much, but you're the only one who'll remember." When I reported what happened to my superiors, they listened politely. Then they told me I'd experienced trauma-induced hallucinations, possibly exacerbated by head injury and exposure. The two hikers' deaths were officially ruled as bear attacks. The case was closed. Reeves, Fish, and Sarah were debriefed separately. Their reports made no mention of creatures, of caves, of anything beyond a standard search and rescue operation that encountered difficult terrain and hostile wildlife. When I confronted Reeves about it, he looked at me with empty eyes and said, "I don't know what you're talking about, Sergeant. We found bear kills, made our report, came home." It was like someone had reached into their minds and edited out the truth. I was medically discharged 3 months later. PTSD, they said, delusional episodes, inability to distinguish reality from hallucination. But I know what I saw. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear them, the clicking in the darkness, the mimicked voices calling from the forest. I hear Hendrix screaming. I hear Garcia's last words cut short by shrieking. I tried to go back once, 6 months after I was discharged. I drove up to Washington, hired a guide, tried to find that trail again. But every path I remembered led nowhere. Every landmark had changed. It was like the forest had rearranged itself, hiding its secrets. The guide told me I must be confused. There were no caves in that area, he said. No history of unusual disappearances, just regular mountain country. But I found something before I left. On a tree at the trailhead, someone had carved a symbol, one of those patterns I'd seen on the cave walls, and underneath it, words in weathered letters. "They are the mountain. The mountain keeps its secrets." I think about Sarah Voss sometimes, how she led us exactly where she wanted us to go, how she knew the trail so well even in the dark, how she was there, in the cave, speaking to them, cutting me free. I think she's been protecting that forest for 23 years. Not from the creatures, from us. Last week, I saw a news report. 3 more hikers missing in the North Cascades. Same area, same circumstances. The authorities are calling it a bear attack. But I know better. They're still there, still hunting, still nesting in those mountains, in caves that appear on no maps, in forests that keep their secrets. And people will keep disappearing because no one wants to believe that there are places in this world where we don't belong, places where we're not at the top of the food chain. The Marines train you to think you can survive anything, that with the right training, the right weapons, the right tactics, you can overcome any threat. They're wrong. Some things can't be overcome. They can only be avoided. And sometimes, where the wind is right, and I'm alone in the dark, I hear my own voice calling from the distance. "Help me! Please, it hurts!" I don't know if it's a memory, or if part of me is still there, in that cave, bound to the wall, waiting. Some forests have no trails, because they're not meant to be traveled. Some mountains hide things that were ancient before humanity learned to make fire. And some secrets are kept because the truth would break us. The question isn't whether they exist. It's whether we're brave enough or foolish enough to go looking. Thanks for watching. If this story kept you up tonight, hit that like button and subscribe for more true horror stories from the edge of reality. And remember, the next time you're hiking in the mountains and the birds go silent, maybe it's time to head back. Until next time, stay safe out there.